Hello and welcome to another episode of my sound design tutorial series. Nowhere the boy here. Today, we're talking LFOs. Now, you've probably seen them in maybe a synth VST that you use or an Ableton effect. And LFOs are low frequency oscillators, which means they oscillate at a frequency below the audible level. So if you see here, this is averaging at 1 hertz. And if we go all the way to the right, we're at 40 hertz, which gets into the audible range. But generally, we're talking about those frequencies that you can't hear, but we can automate parameters. And basically, any parameter that you can adjust, any knob, you can LFO. And so to demonstrate that, I grabbed a bass from the September Patreon sample pack, and what we're going to do is we're going to map this LFO to the frequency to give you a clear understanding of what's happening when we LFO something. But before we do that, I'll just take you through what's going on here. So we have the map button, and this is the first thing how we're able to map anything to the LFO. So what you'll do, and this is the LFO in Max for Live. So if you have Live Suite, you get access to Max for Live, so you get these LFOs. So what you'll do is select the map button, and then you simply click any parameter that we want to LFO. So in this case, it'll be the frequency of this top band. So now that we've mapped it, you can see it's working because it's moving. And so what we have on this LFO is we have rate control. So you can see here that as the rate increases to the right, it's going to get a lot. The automation's going to get a lot faster, and we have this free mode, and then we have a synced mode. So we could sync this to our particular tempo, which can be really helpful. And you can see what's going on with this visualizer here, which I think is really neat. But I really enjoy using the free rate, because it can be really fun to automate this, and I find it to be a little smoother. And also, it can be really cool on effects to do this slow rate where you're getting this very slow, organic kind of undulation. I love doing that with LFOs. So we have the rate here, but what if we didn't want to LFO it? So, right now, this is what it would sound like. So what if we wanted to have a more subtle LFO? Well, we could adjust the depth. You can see what's happening as we lower the depth here, the range in which the LFO is operating, so the amplitude is reduced. So now you're going to get a much subtler effect. And then with the offset, we can control what range we are LFOing. So you can see if we go all the way to the left here, we're going to focus on, in this case, the lower frequencies. And if we offset it to the right, it's going to focus up top. So you can see how adjusting the rate, the depth, and the offset, we can focus on a particular range. So you can really dial in the LFO. So in this case, maybe, because this is kind of more for like a typical, dubstep kind of wub sound, using like an LFO and a filter, we could decide that, we want the depth to be in the middle a little bit here. We want the offset to be up here, and we want to slow down maybe the rate a little bit. So now we're going to get. So you can hear what's going on there. In that case, I was thinking maybe a quicker rate, but a much smaller depth would be really nice. So we would keep the lower frequencies and just get this nice wobble in the middle here. Now we're not limited to just using a sine wave. You can see here that we have the sine wave selected. Well, they have all the different wave types. Another one that I really enjoy is the random. So it's going to give us a random value. And it might not be as good for getting like a dubstep bass sound, but this can be awesome for, I like doing this for delays and different types of like stereo effects. But you can listen to what it sounds like here. And there's all sorts of different modes, like we could choose triangle waves. And they're all great for different applications, so I recommend messing around with those. Now, once you've messed around with those a little bit, we have the jitter here. And so you can see how the cycle right now is very smooth. But if we up the jitter, we'll get these slight deviations. And that can be really fun to mess around with. And then we also can smooth it out. So a combination of the smooth and the jitter might be something like this. So you can get just a little bit of that movement, but not too much to take away from what you're doing. But that's the quick and easy explanation of LFOs. And if you understand LFOs here in Max for Live, then if you go to any one of your VSTs, or plugins, or even stock Ableton effects, they'll have built-in LFOs, and it's the same thing. You can control the shape and the rate and the depth and the offset. And sometimes some will have different parameters here. Like some might just have a fixed rate, and others might not have like depth control or something. But if you understand this with LFOs, you can use LFOs in anything. So the next thing I'll be showing you is applying an LFO chain. So having multiple different LFOs control different parameters, and then having other LFOs controlling the parameters on other LFOs. So you get this really, really interesting layering of LFOs. And that's where I think LFOs are super powerful. They're great by themselves, but then when you get a whole chain of them, it becomes a force to be reckoned with. And, it's great having these digital LFOs, because if we were to buy a hardware LFO, like each LFO costs, a big chunk of change. But here we're able to decide, I want to duplicate this LFO half a dozen times, and boom, we have it. And we can map these to all different parameters and really get a ton of automated movement happening super, super quick. So one of my favorite applications for LFOs is when I'm making a synth pad. And so what we're going to do is create a pad. So I made this quick pad in Serum. So let's take a listen to how it sounds without anything on it. So first thing that we're going to do is drag in an arpeggiator, and I'm going to quick play with the style. I'm going to choose diverge and maybe do 3 steps for now. We'll start there. And then what we'll do is drag in a number of LFOs. And what we're going to do is we're going to map some of the LFOs to the arpeggiator, and then we're going to map other LFOs to the LFOs that are controlling the arpeggiator to get this very interesting movement. So first thing that we're going to do is select the map on this first LFO, and let's map it to the rate. So now we can see the rates, we're going super slow and super fast, and this is going to sound like... Now, we could play around with the rate. We could have a slower rate for this. And we could do that. We could mess around with the depth. We could also pick a different type of LFO. So let's do random. So now it's going to pick a random step every time. So we'll get this. And let's take the second LFO and let's map it to the gate. So we're going to control the length of each particular arpeggiator step. So now we'll get... And we could go and adjust this rate a little bit. Now for all of these, we could sync it to a synced rate. So, we could do 1 or a half or a quarter. But I really enjoy choosing the free mode, and especially with LFOs that are controlling other LFOs. So I love doing these really slow rates that aren't particularly set to the tempo. But since everything else is very tempo synced, it's going to still sound in time, but you'll get this this organic undulation. So now we'll get. Now what we could do with these LFOs is start LFOing these first two LFOs. So it gets a bit into LFO inception. So let's map this LFO to the original rate. And you can see how this is affecting this particular wave. So we're still getting a bit of the random steps, but now you can see how the sine wave is starting to influence it. So now what we're going to get is and with this LFO, maybe let's map the rate on this second LFO. And let's adjust that depth a little bit. There we go. This is really scratching the surface for what you can do with LFOs. Any parameter that you could automate or adjust, you can also LFO. And I love doing multiple different LFOs onto different effects. So if we wanted to take this a step further, we could go grab the echo effect. And this could be really fun. We could unchain both the left and the right channels, and we could do individual LFOing on this. So we could just duplicate these a couple times. And once again, if you ever want to change which parameter you're LFOing, you just hit the X, and then you can remap it to anything else. So now we can map this LFO to the left channel. We could map this LFO to the right channel a little bit. Maybe we could pick different rates. So now we're going to get So right now, with the LFOs that we have set, you're going to get slightly different variations every time, especially if we select the random option. So, maybe we could go random here, random here. And so now we're going to get and you can hear how each particular measure, the LFOs are a little different. So you're going to get these little variations that never sound particularly wrong, especially because with this arpeggiator, we've locked it to 12-step for the distance. So it's always going to be within the particular key. So this is a great way at getting all these like subtle variations. And if you want to have even more control over this, we could go select a new track, we could arm it, and we could record in what we're getting here. So that way you can find those tiny little nuggets where it does a particular LFO that sounds really nice, and then you could loop that up and use it in your music. So that's something I do once I'll get some LFOs set up and I'm like, okay, this is like what I want. I have the particular synth that I want. I'm not going to mess around with it anymore. Then I could start recording. So that way, if there was one little spot here that we really liked, we could drag this out and we could listen. We could be like, oh, I just want to loop this one section. And then you could And then you could have a little more control and consistency. But that being said, it's always going to sound pretty cool. And not gonna lie, there's some times where I'll go an entire project and I won't even freeze or flatten or record in a new channel for this, and I kind of, whatever my final export is, that's going to be the way it slightly varies. And for me, that's a good way of still having that that sense of mystery where you're not sure exactly how it's going to sound, but you control all of the rates, all the depths, offset, of the LFOs. So you're able to control, everything, but then allow yourself to have a little breathing room where you can get some really interesting moments. So I hope this tutorial was helpful. Really go wild with using LFOs. If you use a particular VST like a synth and you notice there's an LFO section and you've never tried it before, go mess around with it. And because LFOs are such a powerful tool that allow you to get a ton of movement really quickly. So as always, let me know in the comments section below what topics you'd like to see me cover next. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day, and as always, keep on making those beats.